very much. Okay, so I'm going to deliver a 25-minute talk in 18 minutes, okay? So I'm going to talk fast, so please try to keep up as best you can. It might not work, who knows. I could pick up from some of the things earlier from Chris talking about the power of narrative and people telling their own stories and so on. I work for a theatre company. I'm going to talk about learning through dialogue, I suppose, and dialogue in theatre. And I'm going to show a few pictures behind. They will just revolve themselves, as I understand it, just in case I get boring. There's pictures of the work that's happening behind. It's not particularly relevant, but it'll just colour things up a little. Okay, so I warn you, I'm going to swear 3 times. Okay, I'm going to use the same word 3 times. I did clear it with people beforehand, but if that's problematic for you, please leave now. So basically, I work with homeless people and ex-homeless people. I founded this company called Cardboard Citizens. And to begin with, I want to tell you about a moment of dialogue which happened to me last year. I had my bike stolen last year. 2 hours after I picked it up, I bought this new super-duper bike. I was cycling to Paris to raise money for Cardboard Citizens, my company. Bought this new bike, picked it up at 6 o'clock in Spitalfield, cycled up to the Arcola Theatre in Dalston. Going to watch Carol Churchill play about the Diggers, a revolutionary movement in this country. You may be aware of them. They disapproved of property. The show was called Light Shining in Buckinghamshire. Anyway, so I had the bike cycled for 15 minutes, parked, locked it up, of course, went in to watch the display about property. It's very good. Came out, somebody had nicked my bike. So I was very depressed, of course. Next day I rang the police. They told me to look on a website called Gumtree. They said if your bike's been stolen, if they're going to sell it, it'll probably appear on Gumtree within 48 hours. So I looked on Gumtree the following day and I saw it for sale. Or at least it looked exactly like my bike. I rang the police, I asked them, and they asked me, was it the photo of your actual bike? And I said, no, it's not a photograph of my actual bike, it's the generic photograph of that bike, but it's the right year, they're selling it for far too little, it's improbable, I'm pretty sure it's my bike. I said, well, if it's not actually the photograph of your bike, we can't help you. Right, fantastic. I rang the seller and arranged to meet him to buy it. I rang various mates, trying to get together a posse to accompany me to the meet. All my friends cried off. They all had really good excuses. Finally, I found my friend Patrick, who I met through Cardboard Citizens. He's a bin man now. He agreed to come after he finished his round. He'd be a bit exhausted, but he'd come with. Everybody else had excuses. My son pointed out that the young man living next door to me, Jermaine, had just come in. Why not ask him? Okay. I lived in my house in New Crossgate for some 17 years, had little contact with the neighbour that side. The family was of Jamaican origin, kept themselves to themselves pretty much. Old Mr. Brown came over on the Windrush, ancient guy, deaf as a post, difficult to communicate with him. He was ancient and black, I was white and middle class. We had little reason to talk to each other, and it was difficult to communicate. His son, Big Tony, lived there for a while. Then for a while, Big Tony's son, Little Tony, lived there while he was a young teenager. I knew Little Tony a little bit better than the rest because sometimes he used to come through our house to get into his house, old Mr. Brown's house, because he couldn't raise Mr. Brown knocking on the door because Mr. Brown was so deaf. So I knew him a little bit, but hardly knew any of them. Anyway, eventually old Mr. Brown died, Big Tony was gone, Little Tony grew up, eventually moved out. His cousin Jermaine moved in. Jermaine bred pit bulls. So I scarcely ever had a conversation with Jermaine, nor he with me. We never had any reason. So I went and asked him on my son's advice. And asked him whether he'd come with to this meet, and he agreed, which was great. Unfortunately, he didn't have one of his dogs available. But just as we were chatting, his cousin, Little Tony, turned up. And he said he would come too. Now, Little Tony had grown up now, and he's the same size as Big Tony. He's a big bloke. So basically, I'm sorted. I've got my posse. So we go into my car, and we go out to this meet, and I arranged for my guys to stay back. I'll meet the buyer. When I'm sure it's my bike, I'll make this sign. And then they're to step forward, and then we'll do whatever we have to do. So I meet the guy, I turn the bike over, I check the serial number, it is my bike. Read the chassis number, it's absolutely my bike. So I turn it back over, I say, that's a nice bike. At which point my guy starts stepping forward. I say to the bloke, the seller, I say, that's my bike, fuck off. And he looks at me in total amazement, he says, what? Little Tony steps forward, he says, that's his bike, fuck off. At which point, off he fucks at some point. And it's glorious, and we are just celebrating, it's hysterically funny, it's hugely enjoyable, we all go and have a drink, and we start talking, and it's great. We replay the guy running off numerous times and what he said and how everybody said it to him. And for the first time we have a decent dialogue, first time ever, because we shared an experience, is the point of this long story. We shared an experience, we had a reason to talk, we had a context for a conversation. And we discovered that we are not so totally different after all, as Chris is suggesting. We're connected. And I got my bike back. Now, if I'd been really brave, I would have engaged a thief in dialogue. I would have tried to find out who he was and why he stole my bike, but I didn't. Because I had some power, because I was afraid of him, I suppose. Instead, I just told him to fuck off. That's the last time I'm swearing. Sorry about that. Okay, so I'm going to talk about theatre and dialogue. I'm not going to talk about vigilantism. I'm not going to encourage even benign vigilantism of this kind. The excuse of this story is dialogue. Without dialogue, we can't know each other. With dialogue, we can understand each other. And that's the basic premise of the theatre work that I make. We have fewer and fewer contexts for dialogue, it seems to me. In our gated communities and boundaried lives, we have fewer and fewer opportunities simply to meet our fellow citizens. The theatre I make is about dialogue. Mainly it's a dialogue between people who've been homeless and other people, a lot of the time between homeless and ex-homeless people, some of the time with a more general public. Great thing about dialogue, it goes both ways. It's a two-way conversation. And when I'm teaching, I do a certain amount of teaching, I prefer to use a dialogical form of teaching. All the TEDtalks I've seen, I watched some yesterday, seem to me to be monologues, and I've got a little bit of an issue with that because before I even start, it's a sort of oxymoron, isn't it? Here I am doing a monologue talking about dialogue. It doesn't entirely make sense. So I framed a few questions to myself as if I was having a dialogue, which I think is what Socrates would have done if he had a TED talk. So, why theatre is one question. Shakespeare famously said that making theatre was to hold a mirror up to nature. I hold a different kind of mirror up to nature, work with a different kind of mirror. It's called the theatre of the oppressed. It's the creation of a Brazilian man called Boal, and it's designed to offer a practical theatre, a participatory theatre, that can help us understand who we are by looking at ourselves and at others and where we are and where we find ourselves and asking all the time, does the world have to be like this? And helping people together to find out ways to fight the oppression, whatever its form. Forum theatre is its best known manifestation. I suspect by now, because we've been doing it for some years and other people it's common now, you probably know a little bit about it, but I'm going to tell you it anyway. In forum theatre, we make a play about an issue of concern, okay, in which our audience has some kind of investment or some kind of shared experience. In Cardboard Citizen's case, it's ex-homeless people making plays for homeless audiences, sometimes for mainstream audiences. And in the play, a central character fights against an obstacle, an oppression, a difficulty, bravely fights to get what she wants and is defeated. This acts as a form of provocation, if you like, to the audience, who see someone like themselves treated unfairly, unjustly. And this stimulates, that acts as a sort of call to action for the audience. They change from spectators to spectators. And we launch into a kind of theatrical debate, a dialogue, again a dialogue. We replay parts of the play, and whenever we come to a moment where a spectator feels the main character might usefully have done something different, we stop the play there, and then they come on stage, they take the character's place, and they try their new idea. the other characters in the play act as they feel their characters would react on a bad day. They make it really difficult for any idea to succeed, to really try out the idea. Some things work, some things don't work. There's a lot of conversation, a certain amount of laughter, debate, a sense of solidarity. People should leave with an armory of new ideas to fight the slings and arrows of their daily lives. Every idea is debated, and we don't have to agree, okay? What's the point of this? That was one of those questions. Boal called it a rehearsal for reality. Sometimes he called it a rehearsal for revolution. The idea is that we can extrapolate from the discoveries made in the theatre into our real lives. Nowadays, this whole field is called applied theatre. And it's usually applied to a particular social context, and the people who fund it usually want particular outcomes, and those outcomes tend to be social outcomes. They tend to be somewhat limited outcomes, but we can make it achieve other outcomes at the same time. Hamlet, I think, contains the first example of applied theatre. It's the play within a play, The Mousetrap. Those of you know Hamlet? Anyone know Hamlet? Not sure. Anyway, there's a play within a play there, which is the first example, only example, of detective applied theatre, where Hamlet is using the play to discover Claudius's guilt. Okay, so what do we do? Well, we do many things, some which funders want, some which funders don't want. We help people, funders tend to want us to help get homeless people off the street, to find jobs, get education, get into college and so on, and we do all that stuff. And it's great, happily, but it's not also the only thing that we do. We also try to understand why there are homeless people on our streets in our very rich country, and what forces are at work to keep people where they are. And applied theatre is also theatre, so there's the simple pleasure of art that Chris was talking about, to experience beauty, to understand emotions, to share with other people, to put ourselves in other people's places. What proof do you have that any of this works? Okay, two final stories to end with. I think I'm running okay on time, am I right? Oh, where is it? Oh, it's there. Fantastic. I never saw that. Okay. One, the kind of outcome which social funders are very proud of. Very quickly, a couple of years back, we were doing a show, and a woman was barracking through the show. She was quite annoying. My friend Terry O'Leary was facilitating it. Eventually, Terry got her up on the stage. She was drunk. She was quite annoying. The other members of the audience were getting quite annoyed with her. We're okay with that stuff, but it can get annoying. Anyway, she intervened on stage. She took the character's place. And her idea was that the character who in the play was an alcoholic should go to Alcoholics Anonymous, to a meeting of AA. So she took the character to an AA meeting on stage. She did the idea, we applauded, we discussed it, we debated it, she went back to her seat, she resumed her barracking, and then that was it, and it was all fine. Okay, so about 4 months later we came across this woman again. The following day, she was 3 months clean. Okay, the following day, she had gone to her very first AA meeting. She had exactly rehearsed a possibility for change on stage, seen that it had worked, the debate proved that it was worthwhile, and she followed it through. The following year, she was performing for us. She worked for us. We employed her as an actor in the following gospel stores, so it's a perfectly circular outcome. So that's very pleasing in that kind of does theatre do anything kind of way. And finally, much earlier, I want to talk about a very different kind of outcome. 1991, when we first started Cardboard Citizens, and I really had little idea what I was doing at that time. We recruited the very first group of Cardboard Citizens from around Waterloo. At that time, there was a community of homeless people living there, a place called Cardboard City. There was about 300 people living there. And after a workshop in the Boal Ring, just by there, to recruit our first group of performers, this guy came up to me. At that time, we were working as a branch of a theatre company called the Boal Theatre Company, and this was a project for Boal, which turned into the company which I now lead. And this guy came up to me, and he's wearing a long black coat and a string vest. It's freezing, by the way. And he says, "Excuse me, are you from the Boal Theatre Company?" And I said, "Yeah, you're on the right tracks." And he said, well, basically, to cut a long story shorter, he invites us to perform in his new theatre venue, which he's just inaugurating, which he calls the EEC Theatre Guild. So I trudge across the Boal ring with him to look at this venue. There's an archway on the other side of the Boal ring. It's got tarpaulins on the side, and painted on the tarpaulins is the EEC Theatre Guild. We look inside, there's about 30, 40 people just kipping in there. Okay, so obviously we couldn't resist this invitation. So we do our first Cardboard Citizens tour, and it's about 2 or 3 weeks, and at the very end of it we end up and we get the hang of this forum theatre thing, and we end up in his venue. And they completely transformed it, There's ranked seating there, there's a brazier burning there, there's about 70 people there in various different stages of happiness. There's about 15 dogs there. They've got a seat of honour for the local vicar, and we're doing this forum theatre thing, and we're just about holding it together, and it's very naturalistic and real. And there's this scene where somebody goes for a job interview, and he's rejected in the job interview, and we've seen numerous interventions in this on the tour, pleading with the guy, explaining one's condition, explaining why one was so scruffy, blah blah blah, reasoning and so on and so on. Comes to that moment. I hear a shout of stop. That's how we work in forum theatre. And I look to see who it is. And it's my friend who invited us there, who calls himself Zai Azar. So it's Mr. Zai Azar, and he comes down on stage in his long black coat and his string vest into this naturalistic scene. And I already have certain preordained sort of social outcomes that I expect for this. I've already programmed myself totally for this. But he comes on stage, walks into the scene, confronts the employer, and he says, and at this point they took out their flutes and danced their way to happiness. And he took out his flute. A few other people came on stage and they started dancing around. And I let this run for about 2 or 3 minutes, but then to my eternal mortification, I stopped it and I said, okay, thank you. It's very nice. Was that real? Oh, please, spare me, please. What right did I, this middle-class twat who found this new form of theatre, have to suggest to a group of homeless people living in a cold winter under an arch what was a good solution and what was a bad solution? For them, it was a real and appropriate solution entirely so, and we discussed it, and eventually I understood that it made perfect sense. You'll be happy to hear it's the last one. Basically, theatre is a place of dialogue, dialogue as a medium for learning, dialogue vital to understand the other and to develop ourselves and to find ourselves. That's it.